This is the story of faith, obedience, and a miracle that brought down the walls of an impenetrable city. This is the story of Joshua and the Battle of Jericho. After the death of Moses, the great leader who had brought the Israelites out of Egypt, the mantle of leadership fell upon his trusted servant, Joshua. God himself commissioned Joshua, promising him victory and his unwavering presence. "As I was with Moses, so I will be with you," God declared. "I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and very courageous." The task before Joshua was monumental: to lead the people of Israel across the Jordan River and into the Promised Land, a land flowing with milk and honey, but also a land inhabited by powerful and fearsome enemies. The first major obstacle that stood in their path was the formidable city of Jericho. Jericho was not just any city. It was one of the oldest and most heavily fortified cities in the ancient world. Its massive walls, possibly a double set of walls, rose high into the sky, seeming to touch the heavens. They were so thick that houses were built upon them. From a human perspective, conquering Jericho seemed like an impossible feat. The city was strategically located, controlling access to the central hill country of Canaan. To take the land, the Israelites had to first take Jericho. The people inside the city, having heard of the Israelites' miraculous crossing of the Red Sea and their victories over powerful kings, were paralyzed with fear. They had sealed their gates, and no one went in or out. The city was on lockdown, prepared for a long siege. Before launching an attack, Joshua, like a wise military commander, sent 2 spies to scout the city and the surrounding land. The spies entered Jericho and found refuge in the house of a woman named Rahab, who lived on the city wall. Her profession was that of a harlot, but her heart was open to the God of Israel. When the king of Jericho heard that Israelite spies were in the city, he sent soldiers to Rahab's house to capture them. But Rahab, demonstrating immense courage and a budding faith, hid the 2 men on her roof under stalks of flax. She misdirected the soldiers, telling them the men had already left the city, sending the king's men on a futile chase. With the soldiers gone, Rahab went to the spies and made a profound declaration of faith. She told them, "I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us." She recounted the stories she had heard of God's power, the parting of the Red Sea, and the victories over the Amorite kings. She recognized that the God of Israel was God in heaven above and on earth below. Her faith was not just a fleeting thought, it led to action. She asked the spies to swear an oath to her that when the Israelites conquered the city, they would spare her and her entire family. The spies agreed. They instructed her to tie a scarlet cord in her window, a sign for the Israelite army. Anyone inside her house, marked by this cord, would be saved. Rahab then helped them escape, letting them down by a rope through her window, as her house was part of the city wall. The spies returned to Joshua, their report filled with confidence. "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us." With the spies' report confirming God's promise, Joshua prepared the people. But the battle plan God revealed was unlike any military strategy ever conceived. It was a plan that required not swords and battering rams, but absolute faith and precise obedience. God's instructions were specific and unconventional. He told Joshua that the Israelite army, along with the priests, was to march around the city of Jericho once a day for 6 consecutive days. The procession was to be led by armed men, followed by 7 priests carrying trumpets made from ram's horns, known as shofars. Behind them, more priests would carry the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred chest that represented the very presence of God among his people. The rest of the armed guard would follow behind the Ark. There was one more crucial instruction. Throughout these marches, the entire assembly was to remain completely silent. The only sound to be heard would be the footsteps of the marching thousands and the continuous blast of the 7 trumpets. The soldiers were not to utter a war cry, a shout, or even a single word until Joshua gave the command. This command for silence was a test of discipline and focus. It prevented boasting, minimized fear, and centered the people's attention on God's presence, symbolized by the ark and the sound of the holy trumpets. It was an act of faith, a silent prayer of trust in God's peculiar plan. So, for 6 days, the strange and silent spectacle unfolded. The massive Israelite army marched in formation around the heavily fortified city. The inhabitants of Jericho, peering down from their formidable walls, must have been utterly bewildered, perhaps even scornful. What kind of army was this that simply walked in circles and blew horns? It was psychological warfare orchestrated by God Himself, building anticipation and unnerving the enemy through a display of disciplined, silent power. Then came the 7th day. The instructions for this day were different and climactic. On the 7th day, the Israelites were to march around the city not once, but 7 times. The priests were to blow their trumpets throughout all 7 circuits. After the 7th time around the city, Joshua would give the signal. At his command, the priests would sound a long, powerful blast on their trumpets, and at that very moment, the entire army was to let out a mighty shout, a tremendous war cry. God promised that when they did this, the walls of the city would collapse flat, and the army would be able to charge straight into Jericho, every man going straight forward from his position. As the sun rose on the 7th day, the Israelites began their march. Once, twice, 3 times they circled the silent city, the only sound being the unceasing call of the shofars. 4, 5, 6 times. The tension and anticipation must have been palpable, both within the marching ranks and among the terrified onlookers within Jericho. Finally, they completed the 7th circuit. The procession halted. A profound silence fell for a moment, thick with expectation. Then, Joshua raised his voice and gave the command he had been waiting for all week. "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." At his word, the 7 priests unleashed a long, piercing blast from their trumpets. And in that instant, a sound that had been suppressed for a week erupted from the throats of the entire Israelite army. A unified, deafening shout of victory and faith rose to the heavens. What happened next was a direct, cataclysmic act of God. The ground may have shaken, the air may have vibrated with divine power, but the result was undeniable. The massive, impenetrable walls of Jericho, the city's pride and security, did not just crumble or break. The scripture says they fell down flat. They collapsed into a heap of rubble, creating a ramp of debris that led directly into the city. The impossible barrier had been miraculously removed, just as God had promised. Every soldier was able to charge straight ahead, swarming into the now defenseless city from all sides. The victory was swift and complete. Following God's command, the Israelites dedicated the city to the Lord for destruction. But amidst the chaos, the 2 spies remembered their oath. They went directly to Rahab's house, identified by the scarlet cord still hanging in her window. They brought her and her entire family out to safety before the city was destroyed, honoring the promise made to a woman whose faith had saved them. Rahab, the Canaanite harlot, was grafted into the nation of Israel, and her name is remembered forever in the halls of faith, even being listed in the lineage of Jesus Christ. The fall of Jericho was a resounding proclamation to all the inhabitants of Canaan. The God of Israel was with his people, and no earthly power could stand against him. It was a victory achieved not by military might or human strategy, but by radical obedience and unshakable faith in the promises of God. It demonstrated for all time that when God's people trust and obey him, even the most insurmountable walls will come tumbling down.